Do you want the chain? Jesus. Here. Here. There you go. Can we just move the chair? There. What you want? Now you're close to the heat, close to me. Everybody wins. Yeah. Everybody wins. Okay. Jesus fucking Christ. Oh my fucking God. I can't win. All right. So, let's look at this staff. This is the next major hurdle to overcome. So, what I'm thinking, let's take a look at this picture of Caesaris. No, not that. Not sure about this guy. I have to pull this off. It's kind of a little weird. I like his little dinky extra arms. He's got 4 arms plus these mechanical things. I like the fusion. I don't know about that. I had a dinky arm somewhere. What did I do with it? Oh, there it is. Yeah. So something like that. Or that would be kind of neat, maybe. Oh, I'm going to play with it. So let's take a look at Caesaris. All right. So he's just got this weird sort of like Necroni staff. And we talked about doing some sort of Xenos staff. So I'm kind of thinking something like these on either end. and then something to sort of bridge it in the middle, like maybe like that. So we're going to play with it.
Level for Lafitte on a physical kind of danger level, on a broader series arc level, that kind of thing. And one thing that kind of intrigued me was his wounds that he gets. I guess he gets stabbed at the start, and then he also gets shot later as well, and then it's kind of like slowly getting infected and that sort of thing. In your mind, how does this affect him in a narrative way? And yeah, I guess we'll start with that and we can kind of get further into it.
I think the wound is sort of becomes his ticking time bomb. It's one of those things that when I go back down, maybe start tying Mauricio more into the plot, like you guys have suggested. Maybe he even comes to terms with the fact that this wound might kill him, but he doesn't want to go down without having a shot at Mauricio first. That would add to the whole urgency of the whole story. I mean, the stakes really are just for this intro episode. It's really just survival, I think, because he's just being thrown into this mix. He's weakened and he's really at his lowest stage. So I think it's really just a matter of getting out alive.
If you want the audience to really buy the fact that this is the last-ditch effort, then we really need to somehow, from the get-go, even before he has the wound, to really set up the fact that this is do or die for him. This is it. He has really come out there to seek revenge or do whatever he has come there to do, and this is his one shot. And as soon as that one shot is immediately compromised by Jacques saying, hold up, we're not going to go to Mauricio right now. I need you to do this one thing. And then he gets injured. And then there's all these complications that escalate to really put into perspective that this one shot that you were given, you were wasting it. And then you have Lafitte being in mortal danger, realizing that essentially he's wasted that shot potentially. Maybe he's being saved from Marie, or as you have now. And maybe that actually propels him on a different direction. It's sort of like the epiphany, especially if, just to go back to our first episode, we talked about this Breaking Bad in reverse, where essentially he is a Scarface going to become Mr. Chips, or that essentially, where if that is sort of microcosm version of that, where this is step one, and him realizing that actually I don't need to be Heisenberg, I can just be Walter White in that one moment. And the fact that if all those things that he's done in that episode leads into that realization, given the context that this is the one shot for him, etc., I really feel like you get to a new level for Lafitte.
So I'm definitely going to have to consider that.
And in terms of the wound itself, I guess there's two things. One is like, what's the timeline from when he is stabbed and thrown overboard at the start through when he gets to New Orleans? Is that a couple of days, a couple of weeks?
From when he's originally betrayed, maybe a month.
Right. I was just kind of curious what he gets stabbed initially in the chest and then later on he's shot again. So it's kind of like two different wounds. Is there a way to like make it the one wound that just gets progressively worse from his original betrayal? And, it's all kind of a metaphor for blah, blah, blah. But in terms of like being shot too, I wonder how much that kind of stretches the believability of him being able to like run around and get into all these fights and have this thing slowly happen. I get like the infection getting worse kind of thing, but like could he survive being stabbed and shot in the same period? Like I don't know, I'm just kind of curious about like the logic of that, although it can be heightened.
My initial idea was that it was going to be his wound that he received from Mauricio that reopens in the fight with the sort of swamp folk. Oh, yeah. So maybe I'll go back to that, and that you're right, that it would tie back more to Mauricio and the idea of betrayal and how the search for vengeance is sort of an infection.
What is the timeline between the teaser and the first act?
Originally it was about a month. I might have to condense that if it's going to be the same wound that reopens. So maybe shorten it down to 2 weeks or so, but that's probably not enough time to grow a whole beard and become emaciated. But certainly it is close to being different. There's enough ways to make it look like fallen.
That's interesting because I really thought there was a longer stretch of time between the two, because from my understanding we're seeing that he comes back and I compared it to kind of Monte Cristo last time, where it's essentially
Hello?
This is Terminex calling to inform you that you are due for your
he gets betrayed by his first mate, and then years perhaps pass by, and then the city has moved on, and so when he comes back, it really is not the city he once knew, and I don't think you can really play that if it's only been a month, essentially, right?
Yeah, no, I think the confusion there is that he hasn't been back to New Orleans in over a decade. He left New Orleans and has been out on the sea and in different colonies. New Orleans was sort of his home base for a long time, but he was out for a while, and that's when things have changed. So when he's wounded and needs to return, come home, that's when everything's different. But, you know, Alex, it might even be better. I mean, you could be right that he could be out for that long and then, you know, make it a more substantial period of time between the betrayal and him returning, too.
My whole thing was much more, I feel like it's in a different way. It's kind of like the wound thing that Nick hinted at, where there's a bit of those like double elements that emotionally it's hard to really grasp. Are we supposed to feel like this evolution of Lafitte is based on him being betrayed, or because he's been away from your life? And sort of that contrast that you're playing with, the more condensed it is, the quote-unquote simpler it is, I think the easier it is to really, especially because the world is so dense and you have so many characters and it's peer piece and so forth, the clearer the story is on a very basic level, the easier I feel like you can sell the emotions and Lafitte's journey through those emotions is kind of what I'm trying to get at.
It might just be too complicated for people, like, you know, to have the two time gaps between him not coming back to New Orleans but still being a pirate, and then him coming back with nothing. Just muddies the waters a little bit, you think?
In a way, yes. I mean, again, this time I sort of need the teaser, the existing teaser with the sort of the flashback of it. From the get-go, you know, he was betrayed by his first mate, and essentially that led to his collapse, the collapse of his legacy, all those different things. They crystallized it. He was left for dead, and then he was coming back to seek revenge, which is a symbol for him trying to regain his legacy, or so he thinks. And through that, he's confronted with sort of this new New Orleans that he's familiar with because he was gone, because of this betrayal and all these other things. You really have all those things coming to a head with Lafitte being confronted with the lack of his legacy, the lack of knowledge about the city, his thirst for revenge, which maybe he realizes isn't really his true purpose. All of those things that, you know, again, like if you collapse all those elements into one clear event that encapsulates his fall from grace and the fact that he left New Orleans years ago, I really feel like it would make things much simpler, but in a sort of in a better way almost.
I agree. I think probably I was getting a little strung up on the historical, the historical timeline, and I don't think I should really limit myself to that. I think the idea you're suggesting is the better idea for the story.
And Alex, were you suggesting dropping the teaser where he is betrayed in the first place? Is that what you're saying?
That is one of my suggestions. I feel like that's a separate conversation, but regardless of that teaser, my suggestion is much more to collapse the timeline or extend the timeline, so whichever way Ben wants to go with, but just making that betrayal be the reason essentially why his legacy is gone and why he has left New Orleans all these years, and sort of making that the event that encapsulates why he, when he comes back, there's such a disconnect between him and the world, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with the timeline note. I'm not sure I agree with like not seeing the betrayal in the first place because it spurs on so much of this action, and now we're kind of talking about involving Mauricio even more. So I think it really helps for us to know exactly what happened. And I don't know what would kind of take its place. Like, is it a montage of him spending years in the swamps or whatever? You know, like what's the version of us understanding he lost his empire if we don't see that?
Yeah, I'm not discounting the idea of showing it entirely. It was much more the length of the teaser. And I did not explain it properly at the top, but essentially my issue with the teaser was just that it felt in of itself as an Act 1. In fact, I would contend that the teaser is longer than the actual Act 1 in terms of what happens in both of those things. And so my pitch was essentially perhaps you can collapse the teaser and Act 1 and make that the teaser or the Act 1. You don't even necessarily need a teaser, but even if you do want a teaser, I would want much more of the set piece of that as of the betrayal as really the key of that teaser, and then we lead straight from that into the bad version is he's in the water, and then we time jump. I don't know the timeline, but we time jump X amount of time to him now seeking revenge, and we have a clear goal in mind and a clear understanding that time has passed. He's back in New Orleans, and you can even contrast it however you want, but really see that disheveled person and understanding that time has passed. And he has that clear goal in mind. And within that teaser, within that first act, we need to understand that kind of Monte Cristo. I feel like that's the best analogy I can make, where he spent all this gap time seeking revenge. He developed a special set of skill, whatever. I mean, this terrible pitch, but basically a version of the only thing on his mind was revenge, regaining his legacy, all those things. The only thing he wanted to do was maybe see Louise again, see his brother, all those things. And now he's finally back after all this time. And look how the world has moved on without him. All those things happening in the teaser, and not the teaser, I mean the pilot. And throughout the pilot, he realizes because he gets beat up, because he gets wounded, because of Marie, because of all those extra things, maybe the real journey, or it's like the friends we made along the way, not the revenge we seek against our first mate.
It's interesting. He's lost his physical empire of wealth and status and whatever, but he still has these contacts, and he's still, in the heart of the city and everything. Yeah, no, I agree overall. I think there's something to be done there in terms of the timeline and in terms of clarifying. It didn't even occur to me, I think, when reading this, that there were two different time gaps. The time gap of he hadn't been back to New Orleans in a while, and the time gap of after the betrayal. So finding some way to synthesize that into just a really clean, simple version, I think would be interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can see it wasn't entirely clear, and I think that's something I'm going to got to pick one or the other. And I'm definitely leaning towards more time between the betrayal and the return. I think Alex makes some really good points about. I think that's a more interesting time period than Lafitte's time out, just kind of sacking, Mexico and Texas, which is where he actually was for that time gap. But I think it's a lot more interesting if that's when he loses everything. I think those are all good points.
Cool. So we just want to get into some micro notes.
Cool.
Again, given that it's an outline, obviously everything's not going to be super clear, but just some initial thoughts on this. Particularly, I think the first one was regarding some exposition, Alex.
Yeah, so again, this is something I slightly mentioned in our very first mentorship episode, but this is just something to keep in mind, especially moving towards the beefed up outline and the first draft and so forth. In terms of the exposition is, as the writer, we got to keep in mind that the audience doesn't know the things that we know. And what I mean by that is, in the same way that Lafitte doesn't know the New Orleans that is now, we, the audience, don't know the New Orleans that is now, but we also don't know the New Orleans that was. We don't know Lafitte's references. We don't know all those things. And that definitely is something to be played with. But
Okay. So... what if... So I like the idea of him kind of pegging this guy with the staff, and that's what's doing the transference. So I could have a crystal or something down here, and then I could have this crap kind of flowing out of that. And that would be fine. And then I could do it like that. Originally I had him like that, but I don't have to do that. I could do it like this instead. He's more up here. Yeah, that'd be okay. Man, it's pretty tight. Oh my gosh. It's definitely bigger at the top. So, and I'm pretty certain, yeah. Okay. So I just need to clip this about here. Actually, I can clip it down a bit more. Okay. And for this, yep.
Definitely want to mention something to be aware of, which is a lot of it will be solved by, especially if you compress the timeline and the synthesize the things that we talked about. But just being aware that the New Orleans that we're seeing in the pilot is the only New Orleans we're going to see, pending flashbacks, obviously. That is our reference. So we're already sort of getting a lot of exposition about what New Orleans is currently, that it's also hard for us to contextualize, okay, this is the New Orleans that is now, but also this is different from the New Orleans that was then because of all those different things. So there's layers upon layers there that, especially moving into a draft and all those things, I'm not saying obviously this is solvable in MBG by any means, but this is just something I wanted to mention. And that was especially brought to my attention in, I think, the second act. There were a bunch of double beats where, for example, with the governor putting a hit on Lafitte, that being sort of repeated and back to back with Lafitte's brother and then with Louise, all those information. So I get that you want to convey that thing, but just being aware of all those sort of expositionary moments.
I know you're talking about the grander picture, but that one was more meant to be a more humorous beat, and that's why I did the repetition. And also kind of shows that John doesn't necessarily equate legality with morality. But yeah, I think showing how the city's different. Nick had a great suggestion earlier about maybe he's trying to escape from Jacques' men, and all of a sudden there's a wall where there never was a wall, a brick wall or something. He's running down the street, he thinks he's home free, and so yeah, I think there's a lot of ways I'm going to be able to layer in bits of the old New Orleans or John's idea of the old New Orleans and contrast it with what we're seeing, and hopefully it'll get across that it is quite different now.
Yeah, maybe there's even, this is kind of a little bit out there, but maybe there's even ways to kind of play with that in some kind of device within the world, like, you know, human prison break, how the guy can actually see all the different things that make up different ones, he can see the maps in his head. You know, it's again kind of an extreme choice, but there are ways, I guess, that you could play with Jacques' vision of what the city should look like when he turns the corner, but then it's suddenly something very different without having to get into like 6 million flashbacks.
Yeah, it's a bit like the Assassin's Creed. I don't know if you guys have played Assassin's Creed, but it's actually the version of let's make these superpowers much more visceral in terms of sort of a seeing quadridimensionally the world that we're surrounded by.
Big pitch, but it's just an idea.
So also this is again micronotes, and a lot of it is probably going to be redone or changed based on addressing some of the things that we've talked about so far. But a couple of logic questions I had were, one, I was curious why Jacques was kidnapping Jean to make him kidnap someone else instead of just kidnapping Marie Laveau directly. I feel like some of that is answered by like if we go through the pitch that, you know, superpowers in the streets and so forth, but just want to hear your thoughts on what Jacques is seeing in Lafitte.
My idea was mostly that because Jean is presumed dead at this point, there's nothing really that would tie back to Jacques. So it's plausible deniability for Jacques, but I also really like your idea that Jean just has this skill that is crucial to the mission. You know, I think maybe a little bit of both those factors.
Fair enough. Just a follow-up on that logic question, how does sort of Lafitte know where the new players are, especially Maurice, given that he's been gone all this time?
Pierre's going to be kind of his Robin, so to speak, that gives him the lowdown on the new landscape to the best of his ability. So maybe he just knows that she's located in this general area because he's just been around. So Pierre's kind of going to be his advisor into the New Orleans.
Excellent.
And I guess a logic question or clarification question for me, in terms of when Marie Laveau heals his wounds, how magical are we going with that? Are they infection stops? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, it's going to be a pretty straightforward medical treatment mixed with a traditional voodoo ceremony. So she's going to be treating the wounds, but there's dancing and singing elements and possibly even, animal sacrifice elements that are part of that religion. But as far as actual magic that we're seeing, the only actual magic would be Jean's perception of it through his fever dreams. So it's going to be like we spoke about, kind of playing in that gray area where Jean's seeing this stuff as magical, and maybe even cutting back and forth between what Jean's seeing and what's actually going on, I think could be fun. So no real magic in that sense, but perceived magic through Jean's eyes.
Yeah, that all sounds interesting. I think the other thing I'll just kind of caution you about is maybe making sure to look into perhaps some of people's reactions to the portrayal of voodoo magic and that kind of culture and everything in TV, and just kind of see how people from those cultures actually kind of like take that, and whether it's what are the offensive stereotypes and what's actually real and what's considered a respectful representation of that and everything, and just be careful to kind of walk that line and do a lot of research.
Yeah, that's super important. I've previously written a script that dealt with a lot of voodoo in a modern era, so I have a little bit of familiarity, and being respectful is super important to me. So I think that's a great point, and I'm definitely going to do my best not to portray them in a dishonest or negative way.
All right, Ben, did you have any thoughts or questions or things that you wanted to discuss besides the many things that we've tackled so far?
I think I did before we started, but I have so much to think about now that nothing's coming to mind. I think we decided we're going to do another sort of round of outline, a more filled out outline. But when it comes to actual drafts, I had a formatting question for you guys, so it should be easy. In cable dramas, you always see the act breaks on the page, and I've seen in some streaming and some streaming scripts pilots, they just kind of sort of write it like a 60-page feature with no divisions for the act breaks. What do you guys think about that?
I would definitely, especially when it comes to first drafts and so forth, I would definitely write the act breaks. And then, worst case, if you want to, give it to a manager or whatever, and this is something I've done before, is I would send two versions, essentially one with the act breaks and one without. And that way you can really cater to the particular development person or executive that you want to send it to.
Yeah, for me, I love act breaks being written in because, especially in the early stages, it really just gives you something to write towards and make sure that that's a really strong moment, and kind of breaking up the story into smaller pieces so it doesn't just lose that sense of momentum or anything like that. So I personally advocate for kind of putting them in and leaving them in, but as long as you have an idea structurally of the acts you're writing to, I think it can work either way.
Exactly, and just to jump on Nick's point just now, I Also agree that making the reader's job as easy as possible is extremely important, especially when considering drafts. And I really feel like having those act breaks down the read essentially, and almost feels like you're accomplishing something as a reader when you finish Act 1, Act 2, and you can get that sense of progress. Whereas if you have sort of this huge, like 60-page script that's one uniform block, psychologically it's harder to get through, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. So act breaks it is.
Cool. All right. Well, on that note, since you mentioned it, what are you thinking for the next step? Something like a beefed up outline or a hybrid format?
Yeah, I think so. I guess you might call it like a script formatted closer to a script and a little bit more filled out and start to hit more of the emotional beats and things like that.
Yeah, totally. I think something with, scene headings and then a description of what's going on in the scene and maybe a key line or two, all that kind of thing. Like you said, calling out emotional beats and everything. That sounds good to me.
It does to me as well. Well, on that note, thank you so much to Ben for all his work. And before we go, for our listeners, don't forget that we are on Patreon. So if you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting Paper Team by our Patreon page at paperteam.co/Patreon. That's Patreon. You will get access to our Patreon podcast, cheat sheets, and there's that exclusive Paper Team mentorship update with Ben's thoughts just for our Patreon supporters. So get on this at paperteam.co/Patreon. That's Patreon. And we can keep producing a great show for you like this one every week.
Yeah, so thanks to our listeners for taking the time to tune in. And thank you to Ben for joining us and for all of your hard work so far on this.
Thank you guys. It's great being back, and I'm excited to get back to work on this thing.
Excellent. And for our listeners, can you get all the show notes, including that beat sheet that we've discussed at paperteam.co/193. As always, I'm on Twitter at TV Calling.
I'm at _NJ Watson, and we're
Welcome to Paper Team, a podcast about how to running and becoming a TV writer. I'm Alex Friedman, aka TV Calling.
And I'm Nick Watson on Twitter at _NJ Watson.
Wait, you're back?
I am. I just right in the door then. My Australian hat on and my flip-flops, and I'm all ready to, or thongs as we call them.
Is that a kangaroo in your pocket, or you just have
No, I was saving one from the fire, so I'm finally back after some personal delays, but we're all good now. They let me in the country, so we can continue on.
On that, let's get into today's topic, knowing your worth and fighting for what you are owed as an assistant. What do you bring to the table as a support staff? How do you ensure that you are being compensated fairly for your duties? What are ways of getting the most out of every opportunity, even if you are getting screwed? Let's find out today. All right, before we get too deep into the woods, let's reset the reason why we are making an episode all about knowing your worth as an assistant.
If you've been paying any attention to Twitter or the trades lately, you will have heard of Pay Up Hollywood. Now, Pay Up Hollywood is a movement started by Liz Elper, friend of the podcast, Deidre Megan, and a number of others who have rallied together under this banner to essentially address the issue in Hollywood, which is that assistants are being underpaid and overworked. And it's been a systemic thing for a number of years. We thought it was important to discuss this topic on our podcast because any TV writer who wants to break into Hollywood is almost inevitably going to end up doing these kind of industry jobs as assistant or writer's room support staff, that sort of thing. So it's important to be prepared for the practical and financial realities that entails and know how to put yourself in the best position to be able to succeed.
Absolutely. And that's why we really wanted to do an episode about our own experiences, our own tools, our own advice on arming yourself and ways of putting yourself forward, of knowing your worth, of negotiating. Everything you should be expecting and are owed as an assistant. Even though you may be on the bottom of the ladder, that doesn't mean you have no rights. That doesn't mean that you should be underpaid or overworked. So we thought, why not just do this episode, not just to talk about this topic, but really to dig into proactive ways of taking ownership over your own salary, your own wants and needs, and your benefits as an assistant. So let's get right into that now. And the first thing we wanted to cover is just expectations versus reality, because obviously you have a job, you're going to be paid something, because otherwise it's an unpaid internship, which is also illegal. But what are some of the things that you should be expecting when you are, let's say, a showrunner's assistant or writer's assistant or even a scriptwriter, when you are actually on staff in a room? What are some of the things you should be expecting in terms of compensation and other benefits?
In general, you should be expecting a fair rate of pay that is often, for these roles that are a little bit more specialized or intensive, probably above minimum wage. PAs, on-set PAs, office PAs, that sort of thing. The standard is minimum wage, but once you start to get over into showrunner's assistant, especially, writer's PA, writer's assistant, script coordinator, some of those jobs are actually unionized now, which means they have a set rate of pay, but even around that, like showrunner's assistant, that are more amorphous. It's experience, you should be expecting actually a decent salary.
Absolutely, yeah. Writer's PA usually is kind of minimum wage or slightly above it. Are expected for writer's assistant and script coordinator under the IATSE agreement that they signed a couple of years ago. Just to give you an idea, anything that's between February 2nd, 2020 and June 30th, 2020 for writer's assistant should be paid $15.01 an hour. And for script coordinators, the period will be from February 2nd, 2020 until January 30th, 2021. They would be paid $17.13. So it's slightly above minimum wage. It's because it's so specific, it's so technical usually, it only makes sense that you would be paid above minimum wage. In fact, because it's a specialty skill. It's not an entry-level job by any means.
Right. At the time of recording, for reference, the minimum wage in California for a business with like over 10 workers or something like that is $14.25. I think it's $13.25 if you have a much smaller company, but all of these are quite large companies that are going to be abiding by that rate. So a little bit more than that.
To that idea, we will go into details on ways that you can become this crew, because one of the assistants are investigation, because those companies, those shows are under 30 employees, or they're like a tiny mini company of only 10 people, when actually it's like part of a larger studio for obvious reasons.
Exactly. Now, another really common thing that feeds into wage and whether or not you're actually getting a livable wage is your hours. So a 40-hour work week is the standard for professional full-time work expected across the country, but when you're working on a TV show, it's very rarely ever a 40-hour week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 60-hour week is kind of the guarantee. Really, you should be asking for 60-hour as the standard, not just because you're going to be actually working 60 hours, but because it actually guarantees that you are being paid those 20 hours of overtime, which makes it a living and livable wage, especially in LA or New York for that matter. So really doing or expecting 60-hour a week guarantee is a big thing that you should look out for as a writer's PA, writer's assistant, showrunner's assistant, script coordinator, and so forth.
And to contextualize that again, your typical 40-hour week would be 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. A 60-hour week, if worked in its fullness, would be 12 hours every day. So 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., that sort of thing. And quite often when you are in those sort of PA roles, that is what you should go in expecting, that any day could and maybe a 12-hour day, and sometimes more if they end up paying you overtime.
And to that idea, you should also be expecting, and perhaps we shouldn't be stating it because it's obvious, but we're still going to do it, that those hours are being billed, right? You're not working outright for the benefit of just being on a show. If you are asked to be working overtime, let's say you are post-PA and you're delivering CDs or DVDs or whatnot, the different kinds of deliverables outside of your office hours, those hours of driving time around the city, that should be counted as hours being worked on top of the next point that you should be expecting, which is mileage. If you are driving around picking lunches or delivering things, you should be expecting to be reimbursed the mileage. Now, the mileage money is going to vary depending on the studio and so forth, but generally it's actually decent money. It's one of the ways that when you're in a PA, you can make a little bit more money through that mileage thing, because it's not a one-to-one based on the cost of petrol necessarily. It's more so something to compensate also for the time and the use of your car.
Yeah, exactly. If you're doing long runs from Burbank all the way over to Malibu, or across town from Santa Monica to Hollywood or the East Side and that sort of thing, you're going to rack up quite a bit of mileage. I don't believe mileage is taxed because it's technically a reimbursement, so you're getting all of that money in your pocket, and that can mean the difference for some people on being able to pay their rent or buy their dinner, or afford something a little extra on top of just the bare necessities. So it is a really important thing, and you need to make sure that you are being compensated for that. On top of mileage, there's often something called box rental when you're working for TV production or film. And what box rental is essentially is them sort of compensating you for the use of your own personal equipment. Now, for these kind of jobs, most of the time that's going to be a laptop. Sometimes it could be a cell phone as well. And if there's some like specialized equipment they require, they can be involved in that as well. Those are the two most common things you're going to find. And the typical rate of that for, say, a laptop is about $5 a day. So you're getting maybe an extra $50 a week. But again, that's not taxed, it's reimbursement. So another $50 on top of whatever your weekly rate is actually quite a bit.
Yeah, I would say for me, my experience has been closer to like $20, $25 a week. And I will add to that the box rental amount of money is usually capped. So depending on how long your show lasts, the amount of money you'll be able to get through a box rental is going to be capped at a couple $100, whatever the case may be. So that's something to know going in, is if you are using an equipment, or if you plan on purchasing something, an expensive laptop, thinking, it doesn't matter, I'm going to be refunded for that laptop because it worked. That's not really the case. And I think that's actually one of the ways that people are getting screwed out of money, is because they're expected to be using their own equipment, whether it's their own phone bill or their own computer, to be working, when usually that should not be the case, but here we are.
And one important thing that we'll get into a little bit later that they often don't tell you is that all of this stuff, they're not really hard and fast rules or laws. None of this is actually set in stone. You are able to negotiate things like a box rental. Some shows won't offer you a box rental, but if you ask for it, they can provide it to you. It is within the power of your bosses, whether it be, say, a showrunner on the other side, or if you're talking to the UPM or the producer. These people have control of the budgets and the accountants and that sort of thing, and they're allowed to say yes or no to requests.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to do that, and we'll get into it a little bit.
Absolutely. And I think that is very important, just the idea that is why we're mentioning all those things at the top. It's things you should be expecting, right? It's not things that you should be negotiating, or rather should be taken away. These are things that we consider to be the base minimum. These are things that if you are a writer's assistant or RSPA, you should be reimbursed lunches, you should be reimbursed mileage, you should be getting a box rental, all those things, especially in the context where you are using your own equipment. All those things make sense.
And real quick, a couple of extra things that you should also be expecting in any job, at least within the state of California, is you should have some number of sick days. It depends on the studio and what they offer. I think it's somewhere between 3 to 5 sick days. You also have to work a minimum number of hours to earn those sick days as well, so keep that in mind. I think it's after 90 days you start to accrue or be allowed those. Then health insurance, which is such a huge thing. They've just recently been reforming a lot of the laws around this to make sure that people can't be paying people as freelancers, and they need to at least offer them this. So all studios, once you're employed, again, I think it's still a certain number of days have to go by to qualify, like 90. They should be offering you some sort of health insurance plan. It might not be a great plan, but at least it's something there, and it's often subsidized by the employer and a little bit better than what you might find on the open market.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's part of also the difference between something like a desk job, like a desk assistant job, and something in the room. A desk assistant job usually is going to be a lot more stable, so you can accrue those hours. You can usually get on those health plans because you're working in-house at a studio or a production company or something like that. Whereas if you're on a show, usually the studio is going to offer you a pretty
Yeah, I know, buddy. I know. Let's try this again. Yeah, all right. I'll do it from the shoulder.
Welcome to Paper Team, a podcast about television writing and becoming a TV writer. I'm Alex Friedman, aka TV Calling.
And I'm Nick Watson on Twitter at _NJ Watson.
And today we continue our mentorship journey where we help one of our listeners workshop their pilot from inception to final draft.
And once again, we are joined by Ben Warner. Welcome, Ben.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being with us. And this week is step number 3 as we take a look at the outline of Ben's 1-hour drama pilot, The Pirate King, which you can read at paperteam.co/198. So let's get started. We are less than 2 weeks away from our 200th episode of Paper Team.
That's right. As we mentioned before, we are going to be doing a live streamed episode on Saturday, December the 5th in the afternoon. And essentially, we're going to be on for a couple of hours with a bunch of past guests. We're going to have some special co-hosts, and we're going to be talking everything about writing and the podcast and just having a lot of fun.
Absolutely, and we will be streaming live on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/tvcalling. You can get all the information you need about this special live stream event at paperteam.co/200. That's paperteam.co/200. And also, we want to hear from you because obviously it's a celebration of the podcast, but also our listeners. We want to hear what are your favorite moments or episodes or even guests that you would like us to invite back on this 200th episode special. So you can send all of that either by email at ask@paperteam.co, tweet at us at tvcalling or at _NJ Watson, or fill out our little survey at paperteam.co/200. It's a little survey, takes a couple minutes, probably less than that. It's not that long. And you can join us then on the Saturday, December 5th for our 200th episode special. And now let's look at the mentorship. And as mentioned, this is step number 3. Just to recap, the mentorship goal, it is a monthly workshop where we help one of our listeners, a writer, create a new original TV pilot script from inception to final draft, as we said. And this time we are following Ben Warner with his 1-hour drama pilot, The Pirate King.
Yeah, in our last couple of 2020 mentorship episodes, which were PT-190 and PT-193, we delved even further into Ben's new drama pilot, The Pirate King. Last month, we took a look at the broad story beats, gave him some feedback, some questions to think of. So this week, Ben moved on to the next step, which is the full detailed outline, and that's what this episode is going to go through.
Absolutely. And if you want to hear Ben's thoughts on our first 2 sessions and the process he's been going through to get to that outline stage and ponder some of the questions we asked him in those first 2 episodes, you can take a listen to our Patreon exclusive episodes where he actually tackled all those questions and more. And that's accessible at paperteam.co/Patreon. That's Patreon. And as we said in the last mentorship episode and the one before it, we want this process to be interactive with you guys listening at home. So we would always love your thoughts, feedback, interactions, either via email, Twitter, Facebook, etc. So if you have your own thoughts about this process or questions that you want to ask us or Ben about the Pirate King and his writing, you can always send those to ask@paperteam.co. And now let's dig into the outline for the Pirate King. All right, well, we're not going to read 20 plus pages of an outline on this podcast, but you can read the outline yourself at paperteam.co/198. And first of all, let me ask you, Ben, what was the process like of getting to that outline stage and going from the beat sheet to the outline that you delivered?
Well, the beat sheet was so bare bones. After you guys gave me those notes, and I thought you guys gave some really great, really actionable notes, I took about like a week just to think about it. And I listened to the episode a couple times so I could hear the notes all over again and kind of try to look at it from a fresher perspective. After I absorbed it, I kind of wrote a list of the most important notes to me, and then I kind of just started addressing those individually, how I'm going to try to address them. And then it came down to kind of going back to the beat sheet, integrating those notes, and then expanding.
All right, so let's dive into some notes and our discussion of the outline. So I just wanted to go over, firstly, a couple things we really liked about this. Firstly, I think that you did a really great job of finding clever ways to communicate how long Jean has been out of town, from the geography changing to the embarrassing out-of-date fashion. I love the frilly shirt moments in that whole scene there. So I think there was a nice subtle way to get that exposition out that he hasn't been here for a long time and things have changed without just sort of having a conversation between two people being like, you haven't been here for a long time, things have changed. So I think that was great.
Absolutely, yeah. That's definitely a tough thing to do in terms of to showcase that fish out of water element, and at least on the visual side and in the action and so forth. So I definitely concur with Nick there that it was well delivered.
Yeah, I think that you definitely fixed up the sort of the timeline stuff too that we discussed from the last time in terms of, when did this battle happen? When did he get into the city? How long has he been away? I think it's much simpler and clearer now, so that's working better now too, just in terms of the logic and the timeline. And just in general, I think there's a lot of really fun moments in here, great action sequences, really kind of fun, surprising, interesting ways to carry out a battle or a moment or break the tension with some comedy. So overall, it's just a really entertaining and engaging read, even just for an outline.
Absolutely, yeah. It's sometimes difficult to pull off, especially when it's an action-based script with a lot of set pieces. It is sometimes hard to carry the reader through in an engaging fashion. And so I definitely agree with Nick there that the action was really present. It was really evocative. And personally, going back to our last step with the beat sheet, I did mention wanting more of those action set pieces and so forth. And so I really feel like you really delivered there in this outline. I will also mention the teaser that I really liked. I was a bit on the fence last time, I know, on the teaser, but really the way you executed it, at least in the outline here, I really, really appreciate it. And again, during the second half, we'll talk about more of the details of the outline pilot in a moment. But I really like the second half, especially that Act 4 with the whole set piece with the Voodoo Queen. I thought was really well executed.
Yeah, thanks, guys. That was one of the biggest notes I took, was really just sort of beefing up. And I think that probably would have happened naturally in my process. Like I said on my solo episodes, I'm not much of an outliner, and that's why this process has been so educational for me. This is far and away the most detailed outline I've ever attempted. Yeah, just filling out those little beats. That's the stuff that I love to write, so including that in the outline was great.
That's awesome to hear. What was that process like of sort of getting to the outline for the first time and really beefing it up?
Painful? No, it wasn't that bad. You guys have read at least Strange California, and so you guys know that I like to be a little bit more editorial. I think I have a fairly distinctive voice, and I like to almost like I'm telling a story straight to somebody rather than a blueprint for a finished product. So I kind of towed the line there with the outline where I wanted to make it engaging. That's kind of where my passion for writing comes, and hopefully shows through, is when I have those moments that I could that it feels fun. Like I want someone to be entertained, even when they're reading something like an outline. So that part was actually really fun, and I found myself really enjoying the process.
All right, excellent. Well, let's move into some of the different topics and things that we want to discuss with you, Ben. First of all, I want to mention something regarding Act 1 and the first half of the episode. Personally, I feel like I would pitch to actually cut the Bayou sequence that's scenes 8 through 11 in Act 1 and really move up essentially the pilot, putting the teaser aside, but the blonde of the pilot forward earlier to really get us into the actual story, because the story really begins at the point where Jean gets to his brother and says, I want Mauricio, and then his brother says, well, I can't be happy because XYZ, and the show, the episode at the very least, launches at the point where Jean tries to get Mauricio, as opposed to him arriving and getting lost in the middle of the night with these people that we don't really know and don't really pay off necessarily. I mean, there's the Bernard's whole thing, which I'll get to later, but overall, in terms of the urgency of the episode and the narrative of the episode, I would personally pitch to essentially start with the first scene where he arrives on the ship, but really jump to, I think it's scene 12, daytime essentially, where you remove the bayou to really get us into that fish out of water element without sort of that side quest with these boys and this person who kind of knows him, but also doesn't really have an impact immediately on Jean's storyline.
Yeah, when Alex and I were discussing this at first, I was almost a little surprised because I really liked the action and the way that it played out going through the bayou and this fight sequence and the whole bear trap thing. I think that those individual moments were really fun and engaging. But when I kind of looked at the pilot as a whole and considered what Alex was saying structurally, it kind of made more sense that it does feel like there's a lot of ground being covered in this pilot. You know, we start off on the ship in the opening. We have this whole sequence in the bayou. He gets to the city. Then we have the sequence in the party with Jacques. And then we kind of have this other, bayou kind of sequence out with the plantation place with Laveau. So, I think that you could definitely get into the meat of the kind of the city and the intrigue and all that stuff a little bit earlier by pulling out some of that stuff, and you wouldn't lose too much of it. You could probably even repurpose some of those fun action beats into other places in the script.
I think those are actually pretty good points. Really, the only thing that it would need reworking would just be, I liked having Bernard be able to positively ID John for Jacques, but the fact that I can't think of a good argument to keep it in besides that probably means that you guys are right.
Well, I actually had pitches for those points. There was also, Nick mentioned when we talked about this beforehand, Jean gets injured in that sequence, and so I had pitches for both where, in terms of the person that IDs Jean and Jacques' set piece, I feel like you could actually bring in the captain from that first scene where Jean comes back, or you can even have Bernard's character be present in that, I think it's scene 7, in that ship arrival, and then you can still blend those two together. And maybe there's a little bit more weight there because Jean has been traveling on the ship in scene 7 for a while trying to get back. And so even in that one scene, we get a little bit of brotherhood between those two people. And then Jean goes on his adventure. And then you learn later on that actually Jacques bought this guy to rat out Jean, so at least there's a bit more weight there. And then secondly, in terms of Jean's injury, this ties into something we'll talk about later about the Mauricio of it all, but just briefly, I really feel like you could have Jacques injured in that sequence where he goes after Mauricio, and that has much more of an impact because it's essentially Jean's quest to go after Mauricio that gets him injured, which is then a wound that festers throughout the rest of the pilot, as opposed to just essentially a random character injuring him and that being a side injury that still festers but is less meaningful emotionally for the character.
Yeah, definitely. When we were first discussing it, my first blush pitch was like maybe the gator bites him or something, but then Alex's pitch makes a lot more sense from a character perspective and a thematic kind of dramatic irony commentary of him pursuing this thing is what's going to hurt him.
I really like that fix of the betrayer either being the captain. I think it's even better, like you said, Alex, if maybe it's just another sailor that's on that boat, that maybe somebody that I could show that Jean has forged a bit of a friendship with, and then, the betrayal would hit a lot harder. Yeah, the injury thing coming from Mauricio or the pursuit of Mauricio is great, and it kind of ties back into something that Nick mentioned in our last discussion when, before I had really settled the timeline, the original intention was that he hadn't been away that long. Basically, Nick had mentioned instead of having him get wounded in the fight with the swamp people and having the wound from Mauricio from the betrayal, that maybe Mauricio's wound just reopens and that's what causes it. And that would have a lot more, symbolic weight to it. So I think that's kind of a good combination of both that. Obviously I can't do that fix because the timeline has changed. But if he gets the wound in direct pursuit of Mauricio, I think that's a good fix.
Yeah, for sure. And Mauricio is one thing we wanted to discuss as well. I think he's such an important part of this pilot, an important part of John's backstory and his drive and all that sort of thing. It feels like he's still a little bit.
Fuck me. Okay. Still got to solve this problem of his face. Not 100% sure. I really love this helmet, but I really can't make that work. I'm going to have to move you until I can get this head on here. Okay. We will come back after lunch.